but we need to recognize that what we do today is creating tomorrow, and we want to understand what that is.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Food Matters podcast, your home for nutrition, health, and wellness education. My name is Laurentine. I am a filmmaker and a nutritionist and the founder of foodmatters.com, and I'm here to hold your hand on this journey to optimum health, transformation, and emotional healing. Hello, Food Matters family, and welcome to another Food Matters podcast. And I am so honored to be talking all on yoga and Ayurveda today. So, with this beautiful lady called Myra Lewin. So, Myra Lewin is an Ayurvedic practitioner and master yogini spanning over 30 years plus of practice. She's the founder of Hale Pule Ayurveda and yoga and the author of several Ayurvedic books. Hale Pule is a center for healing and education, and it's committed to sharing the timeless wisdom of Ayurveda and the principles of Ayurveda and yoga into simple terms and practices, allowing us all to bring well-being, balance, and vitality into our modern day life. Welcome, Myra. How are you?
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Doing very well today. It's a beautiful day.
Nice. Well, we would all like to get to know you a little bit more, and especially about your colorful journey into the practice of Ayurveda and how it has influenced your life.
I think it's a fairly common one, and I was very fortunate. I started practicing yoga, and my yoga teacher introduced me to it. And initially, I was a little resistant. Yeah, I just thought, oh, what I'm doing is working. It's okay. And so it took a couple of rounds of introducing it to me, and so then I was encouraged just to try some things. And so for me, it was to try ghee. And it was not the kind, I didn't eat butter or anything like that. So it was a big step. But once I took it, oh my goodness, my life changed. My, my whole body changed because I was
Mm.
pretty dried up at that time. So, and what it did also was bring together the whole of life for me. And so I started practicing and just kept going. And it was a gradual process, but it was continual because Ayurveda made sense to me. It made eating make sense, and it made the connection between my budding spiritual life and and my everyday life and everything that was going on. And and it was actually the holistic nature of it, recognizing, oh my, I am just like nature. And I'm made up of those elements that nature is made up of. And that's what Ayurveda introduced to me, that just it made my life make sense. And it opened up a whole world of living that I had not experienced at all before. And the big thing for me was that I thought I had. I was eating what most people would call very healthy food at that time, and had been for a good 20 years. Uh, but I still had some problems, and as those problems started to clear up, it just yeah, it's hard to even describe how much it's changed my perspective of life. And as I said, it made it all make sense. Yeah, it made the human experience something to cherish. Yeah.
What a beautiful story. And before we get into more of the wisdom of Ayurveda, I'd love for you to share the health benefits of ghee, especially because I know I have been introduced to this interesting superfood, but I'd love for you to share some more of the health benefits of it.
Sure, yes. Well, ghee is comes from butter, and one of the reasons we take the butter from the cow, and we say we take it. I think we should say that if you go into the details about cows and their karma, and that there's some very interesting stories and explanations of that. But but it's a little bit heavy for we human beings, and so we prepare ghee. So we cook butter basically, and I think, and some people these days call it clarified butter, but it's a little bit more than that. And
Mm,
so ghee is a magnificent tool for a number of reasons. It gives us lubrication, and it will do so without causing many of the problems that butter can cause, congestion and that kind of thing. And but it also supports what's called our agni, or it supports our capacity to digest food and to digest life. So other oils are good also, olive oil, sesame oil, for example, coconut oil. They all have good qualities in that, but they're a little harder to digest. And so ghee
mm,
sort of stands out in that regard. But we use it, not only just food, we use it medicinally in many different ways, internally, externally, even in the eyes.
wow.
And it's quite powerful stuff. And for me, it well, I would have to say that I had been oil deprived, so my lubrication level was quite low when I started. So putting that ghee in there, and when it's prepared with love, oh, then it just
Oof,
becomes,
so good. I love talking about these type of superfoods. So when you say I'm taking ghee, what am I imagining here? Is this like something that you have first thing in the morning, or you have a tablespoon of ghee, or and how would you take that?
oh, mostly I cook with it. Yeah. So cooking with it is you can also put it on food afterwards. So sometimes I take a little tub of it with me to if I'm going to a restaurant, because often the food is kind of dry, and to put a little bit on there. But primarily cooking with it is the best way to get started. And as I said, we use it medicinally in that, but I don't. It's not, if it's brand new for someone, that's not a great place to start. It's better to start with just cooking with it. Yeah. And then we get to know it
Mm,
that way. And it has a beautiful smell. And it's most people find it enjoyable. Yeah.
oh wow, how wonderful.
Yeah.
So let's talk about digestion. So a lot of us we come into this world and we don't necessarily know too much about nutritional information. We have perhaps the typical standard lunches at schools, and then we go into the world thinking that we need to create a business, make money, or all that sort of things. And the last thing we really think about is how to look after ourselves nutritionally.
Mm.
And what that has done to us as a society is that we very much rely on fast food, rely on Uber Eats, and a lot of us don't know how to look after themselves anymore. They don't even know how to cook anymore. And even they don't even know how their body actually reacts to certain foods. So if we could do a little discussion on how a one-on-one on how digestion works and how what we put in our mouth, how it affects us.
Okay. Well, one thing we look at in Ayurveda is that everything we expose our sense organs and our senses to, which which is our that it has an impact. It's going to make a difference. And sometimes we think about, oh, maybe we're around a really noisy environment, and we've been sort of dulled to that, to not pay attention to that. But it's having an effect, for example, on the nerves. And so our sight, our sound, our taste, our touch, and our smell are the ways that we take things in. And so, because if you think about, if you're around some really good food being cooked, right, that smell can be quite uh, pleasing. Yeah. And that we often miss that. But so what happens is that the body has a capacity to digest. So we talk about it, we think about it, most people will think about it in terms of the physical, right? Can I eat it, and I don't get gas, and I'm able to digest it comfortably, and I can eliminate. Yeah, then but there's so much more to it, because
Mm,
my capacity to digest the food is directly affected by my capacity to digest life, right? If you've ever
mhm,
experienced being upset about something, being angry about something, and then you eat some food, frequently it's not going to do very well. Maybe it's going to be really uncomfortable. Or if you're sad or upset about it, not good times to eat. So this capacity
Mm.
to digest, we all have it. Some of us have stronger capacity than others. Those are some of the differences that we recognize in Ayurveda among people, that some people come with a constitution that is much stronger and has more fire in it, so we're able to digest more easily. Means we get away with insults longer than somebody else with a different constitution who doesn't have as much fire, but they might have more air and lightness in them, and they tend to be very creative, but their digestive capacity is a little bit less. So we learn how to take care of that, and that can be done with generally the same foods. Sometimes it's just a matter of how much of those foods, and it's also not what we're eating, it's how we're eating. So paying attention, and well, there's a number of other things that I can mention, but I wanted to also just talk a little bit about something we call the mahagunas, which are aspects in nature that are that are present in everything in nature, and they're present in us. And there's three, and they have different qualities. And it's a matter of how much of these qualities are present in us, in the food that we eat, and in the nature around us that will dictate how well we digest. And it dictates how we feel, both physically and mentally. So these aspects are called tamas, rajas, and sattva. So tamas is the stagnation in life. It's inertia. It's also negativity and so forth. So in food, it's food that's difficult to digest, and that maybe doesn't have many life force. So, for example, meat is tamas, right? Because it's a dead animal. And again, not saying it's 100% bad. It's just that's what it is. And then rajas is the activity of life. Well, we need activity, but we need the right kind of activity, and we need it to be in the right amount. Right? So if you think about it, maybe you've done some things that, oh, this is really great. Maybe it's going hiking or something like that. And you think, oh, this is so great. This is so great. And then the next weekend you do twice as much. And and then you find out, oh, that was too much. Yeah. So that's when the rajas starts going up. So we'd like to have that rajas, that activity, but we want it to be right kind and the right amount. And when it is, it goes in the direction of what we call sattva. And sattva is the balance and harmony in life. It's the sweetness. It's when we have peace and serenity. And in terms of food, these are all present in foods. Then it's a matter of how much. So we need enough sattva in the food so it's pleasing. It's pleasing. It doesn't cause any digestive disturbance, and it doesn't cause disturbance in my mind. You see, because rajas,
Mm.
hot spicy foods, for example, garlic, onions, chilies, they increase the rajas in the body and the mind. So they're irritants in the digestive tract, and they're irritants in the mind. And if you've ever noticed that they're very strong tastes. And so when you have those kinds of things, that much rajas over time, it starts to take you toward tamas. One of the things that happens is that people start to overeat because they don't taste anything. They're always looking for that strong taste and pretty much have to have it in order to enjoy something or what seems like they enjoy it. Now, when people remove those things from the diet, for example, in about a week's time, the taste buds come back and then they start to taste the subtlety of other tastes. Yeah, it's a very interesting
Mm.
thing. So this sattva, rajas, and tamas, if you think about it, it's kind of fun because you can look at it in nature and say, oh, it's a beautiful day today. There's just a little bit of light breeze, and the temperature is just right. Yeah. And that, and then on a day that it's rajas, then maybe it's storming, and there's rain and wind and things like that. And when there's a lot of tamas, Maybe it's when the humidity is very high and everything feels kind of heavy and that. So those are all things that happen inside of us too. And this is what we look at in the food as well. So, so I think
And
that's a pretty fun thing to start to look at in terms of yourself and your food and your environment and how that's all coming together. And these things all
mm,
affect digestion. Yeah. And probably,
yeah, beautiful.
I was to say, probably most people have heard of the doshas. And so this is all related. The doshas are actually the elements themselves. And when there's an imbalance in the doshas, then the digestion is difficult, yeah, at best.
And so, from an Ayurvedic perspective, just going back to foods and how this affects our mood. So, for example, I'm just going to give an example of somebody who's a single mother or a busy working mother or a parent that is running late for work and stressed out in the morning. What would you recommend? What type of food and dietary recommendations would you have for people that are dealing with a lot of stress in the morning? Would you consider to even have breakfast? Because a lot of people are not having breakfast these days, or they just go straight for a coffee. What type of regimen would you put that forward for somebody who's dealing with this type of high levels of stress and anxiety and busyness?
Hmm. Oh no, having the breakfast is going to be extremely important. Again, if you put something that has some substance to it, let's just say a porridge with some dates and nuts in it. Uh, that's just one example of many, many possibilities. But that's going to give you some groundedness, that's some sense of of not being too flighty, right? Because if we are feeling stressed and frequently anxiousness and worry comes with that, then that food is going to help so that you're not feeling quite as light and flighty. Again, these all these words and things that I'm saying are all related to the doshas and how those show up in us. And so we have very detailed understanding of this in Ayurveda, and it's actually not complicated. It's quite simple. Yeah. But for someone who's stressed, I'd probably also take a look at what was going on the night before and see how we can change that so that it doesn't start out feeling stressed. And but but definitely having breakfast is important because it will help calm the mind as well as the body. And and uh, again, our ability to digest food and life, it's all connected. And so if I'm going to go to a job where I'm feeling a little bit uncertain about some things, or I feel like there's too much to do, things like that, having a good balance of food on a consistent basis will help that perspective, so that you can start to see that, for example, when you have a job and you work for somebody else, that if there was nothing to do, you wouldn't have a job anymore. So, so there's a lot, but it's our perspective. One of the things that I like to talk about is that when the doshas are out of balance, our tendency is to put on a floodlight and look at everything all at once, right? And then any of us could go, "Oh my gosh, I I can't do all that. What's going to happen?"
Yeah.
Right? But if I bring my perspective, I say, okay, it's good to look at that and say, okay, great. Yeah, yeah, there's going to be plenty to do tomorrow and next week. And then you come back to the spotlight where you see, okay, this is the next thing I need to do. And then just do that. And then you do the next thing after that. And that's how we actually move through things with a sense of peace and serenity, and actually will get much more done in terms of work and activities and things of that nature. And
Mhm.
it's even the same when you think about having a family, and uh, family members are doing different things, kids are doing different things, and that we just, certainly there's a capacity in one day, but and then it's important not to do too much. But having that breakfast, for example, and having regular meal times are things that help, that are ability to make those good mental choices and to have a good judgment, discernment about what's enough and what's too much.
That's so true. And in regards to people that are dealing with digestive issues, we're talking about bloating, we're talking about any type of pain after eating, even flatulence. What would you
Mhm.
suggest from an Ayurvedic perspective, what to address first when we see this type of symptoms?
Yeah, well, it starts with very simple things, which is, are you chewing your food? Are you having regular meal times? And then are you having a balance of types of foods? Because these are all things that have a big effect on your ability to digest. So, for example, if you don't chew the food, your body can't digest it. It's just going to do the best that it can. Your agni, which is your digestive capacity, will actually get weaker because it gets insulted by that. And that agni is on the cellular level. So if you think about that, yeah, so now the cellular level is disturbed. Um, and so then, the food sits in your digestive tract too long, and then you get gas and bloating and things of that nature. Comes with an imbalance of types of food as well, but not chewing is one of the simplest things. Many people who have sleep disturbances don't chew their food well. When they start chewing, it actually makes a difference. But there are other things as well. And I think one of the things that's important to recognize is that everything affects everything else. That we're holistic beings, and so we can't just do one thing. So if I make a choice, for example, to eat my dinner at 10:30 at night, there's going to be a consequence. And yeah, because you're going to go to bed, even if you go to bed an hour later, it's the food's not going to digest, which is going to affect how you feel the next day, which will affect your decisions the next day. You see how it's all connected, and so that consistency of meals, chewing, and honoring the food. And so we can say, "Oh, I'm going to honor the food, but I'm grateful to have the food." And there's even more to it than that. So we can do a prayer or a mantra, but also to recognize that that food is part of nature. Yeah?
Mm.
And so it's my opportunity to commune with nature 3 times a day. And that makes a big difference in life. Because many people who live in the cities and so forth, it doesn't feel like we get connected to nature, but we do have that opportunity. We can we can even take a moment and reflect on all the hands that brought that food to you. Uh,
Mm.
yeah, because somebody, somebody loaded it on a truck, somebody cut it out in the field, and packed it up for you, and that somebody tended it all the way through its life of offering food to us. So that gratitude actually helps to relax the cells of the body, which will support the digestive process. Yeah.
Yes, for sure. And in regards to the specific types of foods that you can recommend to help with a healthy gut and healthy digestion, could you recommend some specific foods that we can make at home?
Yes. Oh, yes. I think one of the things to there are many uh, uh, stories around these days about this food causes this problem, this food doesn't cause a problem, and it can be very confusing for people. But what I would say is that it's important that you have a whole grain of some sort, and that could be rice. It could be white rice, even if your digestive capacity is weak. But and then there are many other grains depending on where you live. But that that having some of that on a regular basis in a meal, it makes a difference. Having a vegetable that's sweet and having a vegetable that's not so sweet. So, for example, like dark leafy greens or broccoli and those kinds of things that have a little more of the bitter and astringent taste. It takes us into another area, but when we look at that, we're looking for all six tastes of sweet, salty, sour, bitter, pungent, and astringent. And those are all made up of the elements. So it's all the same thing. It's all on the same basis of what's present in nature and in us. So so having it simply then is have two vegetables, have a sweet one and a not so sweet one. And then if you're a meat eater, then have some meat, have it be about 20% of your meal, or have a legume. Yeah, so you can kind of take a look at those kinds of things. But when we look at that and talk about proportions of types of food that will bring the greatest balance to the body and the mind, it can look like sushi, it could look like pizza. There's a lot of different ways that it can look. So simple things, though, are to have a whole grain and a legume, and that's one place to start. Another way to go is we have a we have a lot of recipes. There's many recipes available to be able to very simply make a product, a bread type thing, and that would be bread without leavening, without sourdough, and without baking soda or baking powder or yeast. So leaving all those things out, then it's very simple to make that kind of thing, literally less than 3 minutes, and have that with some vegetables. And those are the kinds of things that we do in the evenings. For example, we go just a little bit lighter food, same quantity generally, and then in the midday, because in the midday you have the sun to support you in terms of your digestive capacity. And so a little bit heavier food then, for example. And this is, I think, a problem that many people have, is that they have the heavier food in the evening, and then your digestive capacity can't handle it before bed. And that's one of the things that causes the problems. Yeah.
And what about specific types of digestive aids or condiments that you have in the Ayurvedic tradition? I'd love you to share some of those with me.
Condiments. Well, one of the things that's very helpful for people, particularly people with digestive difficulties, is to have what we call a ginger appetizer. So you just take a nice thin slice of ginger, and that would be a white ginger, not a galangal there's a number of varieties of giant ginger in that, not the real hot stuff, the more mild. And you have a slice of that, and you put just a sprinkle of mineral salt on it, or rock salt, and then a couple of drops of lime or lemon if limes aren't available. Limes would be the preference. And then you chew that before your meal. That's something that will stimulate your digestive capacity. And that's particularly helpful in the morning. For example, sometimes if you get up and you say, I'm not hungry, so I'm not going to eat breakfast. Ooh, the difficulty with that is if you don't eat the breakfast, now you're going to get to lunch. You're going to feel hungry to a certain degree. Some of it's the mind. And but your digestive capacity is not so great. It's kind of like a campfire, right? If you give it a little air, poke it, and you give it some wood, it gets bigger. And if you don't do those things, it smolders and it gets weak. And that's sort of what happens with our digestive capacity if we don't use it regularly. Yeah. So that ginger appetizer, I think, is a nice thing. If that feels a little too strong for you, then you could just have some ginger tea. Yeah, that's also very helpful in between meals, away from the meals, is nice. And then the other thing too is that sometimes when you're cooking food, you might not have the sour taste there, and so lime is a nice way to be able to add a little bit of that, and you don't need a large amount of it. You only need a small amount, so a few drops of it, on your food or on a particular food, is works quite well. Yeah.
It's a really interesting idea, isn't it? That
Uh-huh.
we can use food as medicine, that we can use food to help stimulate digestion before we actually eat our meal. And a lot of times, when we're in a rush or we're busy, we tend to just go for it. We literally just go for the meal rather than think about all these beautiful things that you suggested here. So it's about taking the time
Mhm.
and taking the energy towards eating and the chewing and the digestive aids to really help to start to balance out our digestive system. Thanks.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then
Yeah.
in regards to the amount of meals that we eat, how do you feel? Do we need to be eating the 3 meals per day? Or, there's a lot of people into intermittent fasting that they don't eat until lunchtime. What's your philosophy on that?
Well, again, if we think about the your agni, your digestive capacity, if you start skipping meals, there can be a time if you're ill or something like that. There is a time that could be appropriate to not have a meal. Uh, but in the general sense, it's like a campfire. It likes to be fed, and then it likes to have 4 to 6 hours to digest a meal, and then you feed it again, and that it works really well that way. Now, what I'm talking about on that cellular level doesn't just affect our food digestive capacity. It affects our ability to digest life, which means how am I dealing with life? And it has an effect on the doshas, and particularly vata dosha. When it goes out of balance, when it gets weak, vata will tend to get higher, which makes us more anxious and has us rush. You mentioned, yeah, because when we're rushing, we're in fear, and when we're rushing, it means that somewhere back there we weren't making the best choice into how much to do, or what am I able to do in a day, for example. And that's what we want to do, is we want to start to remove some of the cause. But in terms of skipping meals, uh, what happens to people that do intermittent fasting, people with a very strong constitution will get away with it much longer. And then
Mm,
other people you'll see, and they'll tend to do it for a while, and then they'll overeat. And when you overeat, you create toxins in the body. Yeah, because when you overeat in one sitting, in one meal, then the body isn't able to digest that. It creates toxins, which creates congestion and eventually creates disease. So
mm,
uh, intermittent fasting is something that we need to do every day, which is eat your dinner at a reasonable time. Let's say it's between 5 and 6 o'clock, and you have your dinner, and then you go to bed by 10 to get your best healing through the night. And we have Ayurvedic principles for explaining that. And then you're going to get the best from your meal. So you have, then let's say you're going to eat breakfast at 7:30 or 8 o'clock the next morning, and so you're going to have that, whatever that is, 13 or 14 hours of fasting every day. That's what your digestive capacity likes. Now, I ate 2 meals a day for many years, for over 10 years prior to coming to Ayurveda, and then in my early days in Ayurveda. And it was something that I had done from a spiritual standpoint and for that purpose. And I loved that, except that it aggravated vata dosha in me. And this is what it does in many people. And then Agni starts to get weaker because it's not being fed properly. It gets insulted. We start accumulating toxins, and we end up with illness and disease. So
mm,
I think an important point here is to just recognize that it's important to do things that feel good today, but we need to recognize that what we do today is creating tomorrow. And we want to understand what that is. And that's one of the main premise of Ayurveda is prevention, is that to understand that it may feel good right now, but it's better to understand what you're doing, and is that really going to be the best thing longer term. So
mm.
so that's one of the things that we look at, and why we find following those principles works really well. It helps you to avoid these.
So it's really regimented, and it's really about discipline and following an order for our body to get used to us and our habits and our lifestyle habits and our different ways that we interact with our environment. And in regards to mental health and depression and people feeling, a lot of people are, I would say, a lot of people right now are dealing more with stress. They're dealing more with difficult lifestyles where they haven't really been able to understand the challenges of life. And if there is a type of food that we can go to that is a happy, a feel good food, or something that you can recommend that is a food that we can go to when we're dealing with these types of hopelessness and depression.
Mhm. Yes, what I was speaking about in the beginning, where I talked about the mahagunas, those aspects of nature, tamasic food will will feed the depression. Rajasic food actually can help pull you out of it. And sattvic food is what's going to give you the most peace. So, sattvic food are things that are freshly cooked, fresh vegetables, fresh fruits, things of that nature. Rajasic foods, as I mentioned, they're things that have a little more stimulation in them. And a fun thing that you can do is to look at the color of the food because Rajasic foods have bright colors, so the reds, the purples, and things of that nature. And so that's kind of a simple way in the beginning to get connected with that. Uh, but having warm, if you're feeling stressed, having warm cooked food is your best bet to to stay away from things that are crunchy and raw and difficult to digest. And if the dosha is out of balance, you'll tend to crave those. But
Mm.
when we crave something, it's usually taking us more out of balance. And so, better to think of the opposite quality to how you're feeling, uh, and have that kind of thing to help with it. So, a good warm soup, maybe with some nice flatbread. Those are things in terms of a meal that would be very helpful.
Mm.
Even things like cooking a sweet potato and sautéing a few other vegetables with it, and that those kinds of things that are just going to give you a little bit more substance, but that also uh, give us a nice connection to nature. You know, when we mentioned about that, oh, it's quite regimented in that, and we just in that consistency. What we're doing, what we talk about in Ayurveda, is actually just coming into the rhythm of nature. Yeah, we
Yes.
tend to lead lives that are not so much in harmony with nature, but there's certain things we can do, like the things that I mentioned about going to bed at certain times and having regular meal times. Those are things that will bring that stress level down tremendously, just because it's not because it has to be exactly at 8 o'clock. It's that you come into that rhythm of nature when the sun comes up, and ideally eating before the sun goes down and things of that nature. Yeah, that make a difference in how we feel mentally.
It's so beautiful. It reminds me of my grandma who's from Holland. Both my parents are from Holland, and my whole lineage is from Holland. And she lived to 103. But when I stayed with her a few times in her house, I always noticed that she would wake up quite early with the sun. She would pray, and this would be even before the sun got up. She would start to pray, and then she would, in the early mornings, she would walk barefoot in her garden, and she would actually find herbs, medicinal herbs from the garden, and use it in a type of tea. Is there anything in the Ayurvedic philosophy that you would touch on in regards to superfoods and herbs that we can use medicinally to balance
Abs-
ourselves in the mornings?
yeah, absolutely. The herbs and spices. Ayurveda was actually primarily practiced in the kitchen. So, for example, let's say you get up and you're feeling a little heavy, and that, having some tea made with cumin, coriander, and fennel seeds. Just you could soak them overnight, or you can just put them in some water, a teaspoon maybe in a teaspoon of each in a liter of water, and bring it to a boil for 5 to 10 minutes and turn it off. That Having that kind of a tea would make a big difference. If you go into the garden and you're going to get something fresh, depending on the time of year and where you are, you might get some fresh coriander, maybe a little bit of licorice, those kinds of things. Those are also nice and soothing for digestion. And there's so many others. It depends on where you live. But it sounds like your grandmother was well tuned, yeah, because having your prayers or your meditation and your practices and connecting with nature as nature wakes up each day has a tremendous effect on us inside. And it makes a big difference in how we feel through the day.
Mm, that's beautiful. And it is true. It's like she was waking up with nature. She was waking up when the birds were waking up and, would go outside and feed them little bits of bread from the leftovers from yesterday. And the idea of going to sleep when nature goes to sleep as well. Like it's not a good idea for our body and our digestive system to keep staying up a lot later than nature goes to sleep. So the idea of following natural rhythms, I totally understand. And for our bodies to have a circadian rhythm, to be able to fall asleep easier and to digest easier and to rebalance ourselves so that we're waking up refreshed in the morning is super important. And in regards to sleep issues, if you can touch on some simple tips that we can use to help people with sleep issues.
Mhm. Well, I mentioned chewing your food. That's a big one. But of course, to avoid the electronics for an hour before bed, there are some Marma sequences. There's some energetic movements that can be done that help also. But probably the most important thing is you can have a little bit of sesame oil for most people. You could put just a little bit on the bottoms of your feet and on the palms of the hands. Put some socks on, and you can also put a little dab right on the fontanelle, right on the top of your head, and that will help to sleep tremendously. Another thing too, if you tend to wake up or many times or wake up early, the a little bit of cotton wool in the ears, and we're not trying to block all the sound. It's just to reduce the sensitivity, and that makes a big, big difference for people. And of course, to stay away from stimulants. If you're having caffeine through the day, well, it's not surprising. Your body is telling you it's overstimulated.
Mm. That brings me to the last and final question in regards to energy and energy foods and energy drinks. I was having a discussion with my two sons, and they were saying, "Gosh, it feels so difficult to keep going to school in the morning. Every morning I have to wake up and I feel so tired, and I feel so tired throughout the day in school as well." And I said, "Well, that means that you might not have enough energy. And they're like, "Yeah, we need some high, there's those caffeine drinks, those high energy drinks. Can you buy me some of those?" And I'm like, I think there would be better ways for you to sustain energy throughout the day. I'd love for you to help other mothers deal with those type of questions in regards to those energy drinks and other suggestions that you would have to build energy for children in the morning.
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest thing that I see in children these days, and young ones up to teenagers, is they're not sleeping enough. If you don't sleep enough, we look at it as one of the four pillars of health in Ayurveda. Your food, your lifestyle, your sleep, and how you manage your energy. So if we're waking up tired and we're tired through the day, then we're draining our savings account, you could say.
Mm,
It's, yeah, and because we have to put back in. And when we put back in, it's when we have good balanced meals at regular times, and then we have good sleep and enough sleep, right? Because children are growing bodies, so they
yes.
need extra energy for that. And that energy comes from the food and, properly digesting it. And that's what creates the body tissue.
Mm,
But when they're tired all day long, usually it's because the Agni is compromised. And again, if they don't sleep enough, I had a 7-year-old a while back that he was having some serious ear problems, and that, which we tied back to the fact that he was only sleeping 6 to 7 hours a night, a 7-year-old,
wow.
and that's just it just doesn't work. So yeah,
Yes.
And so it brings me to something that I see a lot these days, which is just because you can do something doesn't mean that it's a good idea. Because eventually it's going to get you. So, in terms of encouraging kids, I think that one of the big things is to find one thing that helps them feel better. Sometimes it might be giving them permission to sleep more. Uh,
Beautiful.
and yeah, and also you not staying up very late at night. That might encourage them to do that, and to encourage something that's calming for them before sleep. And then the other thing too is just to talk to them about how they feel. So, for example, if they do sleep extra, how do you feel? Do you feel better?
Yeah.
And so
Then
those are
they can build a good positive reinforcement for it.
right. It's that for them to understand cause and effect. Kids are usually they're pretty good. I've had 5, 6, and 7 year olds that they get it, and so they start, and it's good. So sometimes for mom to just say, okay, go ahead and do that, and then see how you feel. And it depends on their age and that, but sometimes they need to experience that. So, oh yeah, I have a stomach ache after that, right? So well, let's try something different. Yeah, and if I'm feeling tired in the morning because I've been having a stimulating drink to have caffeine, it's to understand that it's dehydrating you as well as overstimulating the nerves, which then will inhibit growth. So those are things that, um, depending on the age, it's good to have them understand it, and and then guide them. But at some point, then they need to make the decision so they can start to understand that they see the consequences, they experience it, and then gently offering other alternatives is another thing. Yeah,
Mm.
because we want them to be able to grow and mature, and this is also how they mentally grow and mature. Uh, and it's all connected. Yeah.
Mm. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Myra. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. We're now coming to the end of the interview, and we are going to be doing some quick rapid fire questions. So, are you ready, Myra?
I'm ready. Okay.
What is your go to breakfast or meal?
It's porridge. But I make a porridge with rice and barley and dates.
Yum. And what is your favorite supplement?
Ooh. Well, I don't use supplements per se, but I use herbs when they're needed. And I would say that triphala is a combination of 3 herbs I use if I'm traveling or have to go out to eat. It might not be the best. And triphala is made up of 3 herbs, and it's for rejuvenating the lining of the intestines.
What are the three herbs?
The 3 herbs are amalaki, bibitaki, and haritaki. So they are for all 3 doshas. So nice, it keeps things in balance.
Beautiful. If you could choose one lifestyle practice, what would it be?
I would say tongue scraping. And it's a very simple thing. And our tongue tells us the story of what's happening inside every day, every morning, every evening. And so it's a great way to reflect on what's happening, and maybe be able to make adjustments when you want to.
Gorgeous. And what is your go to food as medicine?
As medicine, it would be what we call kunyi or khichdi. So kunyi is actually it's a soupy rice concoction with some ghee and spices, and a little bit of salt. And that's what I would use if I was not feeling well. I'd start there. Easy to digest.
Mm, awesome. I love it. Beautiful Ayurvedic knowledge. I'd love you to also share a little bit about your work that you are currently doing and where you're based and how people can get in touch with you and say they would like to visit you in your practice.
Yes, yes. Well, we're halepule.com and also on Instagram and Facebook and Pinterest. What we do is we guide people to understand. We want to empower people to be able to take care of themselves. And it doesn't mean you don't ever need help, but that you don't have to be running to the doctor all the time. And it's also, when you understand what's happening with your body and mind, and how simple it is and how fun it is when it's related to nature, it gives us a whole new perspective on life, and it makes life a lot more fun, for sure. And
Mhm.
we don't have to be as afraid, and we can develop a nice close relationship with our body, this tool we have in this life. And that's just a richer way to live. So that's what we teach in our Agni therapy program. And we do trainings. We train advisors and counselors to teach other people about Ayurveda and yoga, and how to work with your body and mind. Yeah.
Oh, that's so beautiful, Myra. Thank you so much again. And it's been such a pleasure having you on the Food Matters
Yeah.
podcast. And thank you
Yeah.
for sharing your traditional Ayurvedic knowledge with us.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So, yes, thank you everyone for listening. I really enjoyed that talk. I hope you did too. And there will be more of these on the Food Matters podcast. So, head to foodmatters.com and see you again.